Welcome. Welcome everyone to the meeting of TWIA's Actuarial and Underwriting Committee. It is 10:02. We call the meeting to order. First, I'd like to ask Mike Perkins to please take roll and to also remind us of the antitrust statement and disclosure and statement regarding potential conflicts of interest.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Based on our technology, we have been able to determine that on the line we have 6 of 7 committee members. That means we have you, obviously, Georgia Neblett, Carice Morrison, David Futterleib, Stephen Alexander, and Marilyn Hamilton. As of yet, we don't know that Tony Schrader's joined us, but we ask him to speak up if he's on the line or to let us know when he does join in. You also like me to handle the antitrust and the disclosure quickly at the beginning. So remind everyone this is a TWIA board committee meeting, and our antitrust statement does govern our conduct today. There's also a brief disclosure statement that I need to read, and I will do that now. Chapter 2210 of the Texas Insurance Code requires TWIA board members and certain committee members to make public conflict of interest disclosures with respect to matters before any discussion or vote thereon. Such potential conflicts of interest include a financial or personal interest in an entity that may benefit financially from the outcome of the discussion or vote, and holding an insurance policy issued by the association that may be affected by the discussion or vote. Today's meeting of the Actuarial Underwriting Committee, it includes members David King, Tony Schrader, Marilyn Hamilton, Georgia Neblett, David Futterleib, Carice Morrison, and Stephen Alexander. Our meeting agenda includes the following topics that TWI staff has determined may have the potential to trigger required disclosures. Review report from actuarial firm regarding rate and model review and formulate recommendations to the TWIA board. In connection with the discussion voting on that topic, the following disclosures are made on behalf of the following committee members. Debbie King is employed by a TWIA member insurer. Georgia Neblett is a TWI policyholder. David Futterleib is employed by a TWI member insurer. Carice Morrison is employed by a TWIA member insurer that is affiliated with an agency that is paid commission by TWIA. Stephen Alexander is a property and casualty consulting actuary. If any committee member is aware of other disclosures that need to be made, please speak up at this time, and if you have any questions, please ask. In addition to our committee members, we also have TWI board member Tim Garrett on the line, and staff members from TWI include Murphy, Christina Donnelly, Denise Lars-Lear, Jerry Fadden, John Pollock, Amy Kale, Jennifer Armstrong, and David Durden. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Just to confirm, did you say all committee members are on the line?
We have not heard from Tony Schrader yet. Other than Tony, all 7 are here.
Okay. Well, we'll hope Tony joins shortly. Thank you. We will review and approve the minutes from the July 21 meeting. Does anyone have any comments or corrections or regarding those minutes?
Madam Chair, I move that they're approved as submitted unless there are any amendments to them.
Thank you. Do we have a second or any comments from anyone?
This is Steve Alexander. I second that.
Thank you, Steve. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. We now move to public comment. I understand we do have some legislators on the line that will be addressing us today, and I just want to welcome them to this meeting today. We have Representative Herrero, Representative Middleton, Senator Hinojosa, and Chairman Hunter. So welcome.
This is Tony Schrader. I am here.
Hi, Tony. Glad you made it. Thank you. Can we now go to the public comment?
Yes, thank you, Debbie King.
Mm-hmm.
We want to thank everyone who's joining us for this meeting of the Texas Windstorm Insurance Association Actuarial and Underwriting Committee. My name is Christina Donnelly, and I will be the technology moderator today because this meeting is being held virtually. I will also help facilitate the public comment during this period. We do have a couple of items to cover on the presentation before we get to public comment, so please bear with me just a moment. We are holding this meeting through Zoom and live streaming on YouTube. If you intend to make public comment for this meeting, you may only do so if you are logged in through Zoom or listening on a touch-tone telephone. You can find meeting materials, links to register for the Zoom meeting, or listen to the YouTube live stream at www.twiA.org on our About Us page under Board Meetings. Before we move forward in the agenda, I would like to provide participants of the meeting with a few reminders to help things run smoothly today. If you're a committee or staff member participating in today's meeting, please mute your microphone when you are not speaking. Unmute it when you would like to speak. Keeping your microphone muted during the meeting helps to minimize disruptive feedback and background noise. Zoom will give you a pop-up reminder if you attempt to speak while muted. You should also turn off all other technology on your computer, as other open programs and devices may interfere with the functioning of the technology during the meeting. We also ask that you state your name when you speak so other participants and attendees of the meeting know who is talking. At this time, only members of the committee and association staff presenting to the committee have their microphones unmuted. If you are a registered attendee of the meeting, you'll remain muted for now. If at any time during the meeting you're experiencing technical difficulties, you can let staff know by emailing meetings@twiA.org, and we will attempt to assist you. Please note that committee and staff members will not be able to respond during the meeting to comments or questions emailed to this address. If you've registered to attend the meeting through Zoom and would like to make a public comment, please click on the hand raise icon at the bottom of the Zoom control panel. The hand raise icon highlighted on the image on the slide shows how to find and select this button. You may also indicate that you wish to make public comment via your touchtone telephone by pressing *9. Then you will press *6 to activate your microphone when your name is called. If you've clicked the hand raise icon, I will call your name and then unmute your audio so that you may give your public comment. The Zoom system will prompt you to unmute yourself. You will see your microphone icon become enabled to indicate your microphone is unmuted. The committee chair has requested that public comment be limited to 3 minutes per person to allow time for everyone who wants to participate. We're ready to begin public comment. You'll give me just a moment to review the hand raises. Again, you can see on your screen, you can select the hand raise button, or if you were dialing in via a touchtone telephone, you can press *9 and that will indicate that your hand is raised. The first person I am calling on is Representative Abel Herrero.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members, and thank you for allowing me to address you today. I'm Abel Herrero, State Representative for District 34. I have the distinct honor of representing strong and resilient individuals. In advocating for them, I implore you to reject any proposed rate increases. Our coastal communities do not need any additional burdens placed on them as they battle COVID-19 and worry of major storms damaging their homes and businesses. Any rate hikes would be devastating and cruel to our friends and neighbors trying to survive these difficult times. For these reasons, as well as others, I urge you to reject any rate increases. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Herrero, for your public comment. Give me just one more moment to find the next representative or individual to speak and make public comment. The next person I'm calling on is Representative Middleton.
How are y'all? My name is Mays Middleton, State Representative for Chambers in Southern Galveston counties, and I'm here to oppose any rate increase recommendations by the Actuarial Committee. So we just got back the WTW report, and there are some things on there that we need to account for and actually look at more closely before any rate changes are considered. So one of them is the data on exterior opening protections. So TWIA has that data. Unfortunately, it's not being accounted for in the 1 in 100 year PML. So in other words, things like shutter screens, impact resistant glazing, the age of roofs, roof geometry. We have that data with TWIA right now, but it's not being factored in, and that could reduce TWIA's estimated losses by 15 to 25%. And we know what that would mean: a lower reinsurance indication, which means less of a rate increase or rate change recommendation. So WTW has also discovered that TWIA's hurricane models overestimate actual losses for recent hurricanes like Ike, Katrina, and Andrew by 17 to 31%. We need to get to the bottom of that before we look into any rate changes at all. TWIA spends about 25% of its revenue, about $100 million a year, on reinsurance. And we know there have been 0 claims on reinsurance in the last 10 years. So we've got to get this right. It is a major cost for ratepayers. TWIA also continues to spend a lot of money on interest, unfortunately. So TWIA pays about $250 million in interest over the last 10 years. And unfortunately, that's all related pretty much to Hurricane Harvey debt. So there's $500 million approximately in Hurricane Harvey debt, and that's going to generate $250 million in interest. So TWIA needs to focus on paying down those high interest rate, over 8% bonds with underwriting profits, and which will obviously benefit ratepayers and also makes financial sense too. You know, why are we carrying 8.25% interest rate bonds when the CRTF, Catastrophic Reserve Trust Fund, where the excess underwriting profits are being deposited, earns less than 1%? It just doesn't make sense. You know, no rate increase is needed at this time. TWIA has current funding resources to pay for $4.2 billion in hurricane losses. And at the end of the day, we should not consider any rate changes until we get the opening protections properly accounted for from our policy management system, which obviously will greatly impact the indication for reinsurance purchases. We need to rerun the hurricane models. Obviously, we've seen some issues in WTW's report with the overestimate. We need to adjust modeling. It's overly pessimistic at this point, and frankly, it's based on overestimating recent hurricane losses. We need to cut reinsurance purchases to more realistic levels. And we also need to make sure that 100% of underwriting profits are used to pay down that high 8% interest debt. But not only that, TWIA's policyholders should not be penalized with a rate increase at this time with our economy devastated and Gulf Coast unemployment hitting double digits. At the end of the day, if you keep going up on rates, people will not be able to pay their policies and they're going to lapse. It's also wrong to consider something of this magnitude over the internet only when people cannot make their voice heard in person. You know, millions of Texans do not have high-speed internet or cannot make their voice heard by online means. So please do not silence their voices. This is really not open government when it's done by Zoom calls like this. So everyone in Texas deserves to have their voice heard in person on an issue this important. So people deserve the right to have their voice heard. You know, it's just, at the end of the day, a lot of people are not able to do this, and we've got to take a step back, and whenever we're considering any rate changes, it's got to be an in-person meeting where people can make their voices heard in person. So for these reasons, I'm here today to oppose any rate increase recommendation by this committee, and I ask you to vote no on any rate increase recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Middleton, for your comment. Need just a moment to call on the next individual. The next person I am calling on is Senator Hinojosa.
Good morning. Good morning, and thank you for allowing me some time to share, make a few remarks concerning your responsibility in terms of setting, looking at rate that are being proposed by the report. First of all, right now, as we know, our economy is pretty much devastated. Unemployment is very high. We have many businesses still shut down. We have people being evicted. A lot of people that can't pay their mortgages, they're getting deferrals. And on top of that, we try to get back on our feet. We don't have the proper daycare centers to take care of the children so people can go back to work. So the situation provides us, and quite frankly, many challenges in terms of trying to deal with this huge pandemic, which I know that not a single one of us have experienced in our lifetimes. And on top of that, it's like a double whammy. The price of oil and gas pretty much crashing. And now we're faced with the challenge of all these hurricanes. But at the same time, it's pretty obvious that the optics and the responsible thing to do at this point will be to recommend zero increase. The residents along the coastal area cannot afford any increase in their rates for the simple reason they don't have the financial resources to pay. And at this moment, the responsible thing for this committee to do is just not take any action or recommend zero increase. Thank you so much for allowing me to share a few of my remarks, and God bless.
Thank you, Senator Hinojosa, for your comment. The next person I am calling on is Jordan Anderson.
Good morning. My name is Jordan Anderson, and I'm here on behalf of the United Corpus Christi Chamber of Commerce. I first would like to echo all of the comments made by those elected officials who've just spoken to this group. Our concern at the Chamber is, well, we have several concerns at the Chamber. The first is in how the data is presented and collected in the Willis Towers Watson report. By its own admission, the WTW is only relying on data that was provided by TWIA and has not given the data an independent review. The WTW also admits that they were working on a condensed timeline to prepare this report for TWIA. And as the United Corpus Christi Chamber of Commerce, we think that an issue this important should not have its analysis condensed for any reason. And finally, as the United Corpus Christi Chamber of Commerce, we also think that at this moment in time, when so many Texans are out of work and businesses are suffering due to the impact of the pandemic, increasing rates would only add to this hardship. It's been stated before, and I will say it again, that there are sufficient premiums, assessments, and reinsurance to cover any potential TWIA liabilities for 2021. And now is just not the time to put a rate increase on Texans. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan, for your public comment. The next person I'm calling on is Chairman Hunter.
Thank you. This State Representative Todd Hunter. I know you've heard from some of the other legislators. I represent District 32. And for those that are on the committee, that's Nueces County, the eastern portion. I represent almost all the coastline from Port Aransas, Padre Island, Flower Bluff, Corpus Christi area. And for all of you, I have, along with some of the legislators, have represented the coastline for quite a while. During my terms, I've represented Jackson County, Refugio County, San Patricio County, Aransas County, Calhoun County, and Nueces County. The reason I tell you that is I have a long history and work on coastal issues. And one of them is, of course, insurance rates and TWIA. So let me make these points. Of course, at the top, as you heard from the legislators, we do not want a rate hike. It's bad timing. It's absolutely would be a hardship. So we absolutely request 0 rate hike. In addition, the city of Port Aransas, the city of Corpus Christi, who I represent, they have sent in public comments opposing a rate hike. But also for all the committee members, on September 18th, you've already heard from Representatives Herrero, Middleton, and Senator Hinojosa. We submitted a opposition letter to rate hikes by 21 legislators. So your coastal community is unified legislatively as well as by county on the Texas coast opposing rate hikes. 2, I do want you to know that Senators Taylor, Senator Hinojosa, and myself have had conversations and contact and communication with TWIA representatives. And we've had some good discussions. I want you to know it's been constructive. And I think we want to continue that. So I'm going to make this proposal. Of course, we're unified in a 0 rate hike at this time. But let me make this proposal to the committee. I know that TWIA is looking at legislative proposals and legislative concepts. And I want everybody to realize that the legislative session is coming up in January, which is a little over 3 months. What I propose is that, number 1, rate hikes, rate increases do not occur at this time, and let legislative discussion review with TWIA and others and communities have input in the legislative session, January through May. Second, I propose between now and the end of the year that TWIA designees and certain legislators meet and talk about different concepts. For example, you're going to have discussions of reinsurance. You're going to have discussions on actuary information. And you're going to have discussions on rates. And I know that some of you are looking at issues that might involve creative ways to help Texas handle these catastrophes. So my proposal is 1, no rate hike at this time. 2, let the legislature go into rates beginning in January, which isn't very far away. And 3rd, we set up a consistent, constructive, basically program between now and the end of the year with interaction with TWIA committee members, TWIA board members, as well as legislators to discuss some of the legislative ideas, the rating ideas, and see if there are areas of agreement, disagreement. But I think that would be constructive, and then the legislature is able to handle the rate as well as the concept in the legislative session. So in conclusion, I want to thank the legislators and the public comment folks that have engaged today. But I would really, really request the committee to take no action at this time. Work with us between now and the end of the year. Let the legislature look at some of your legislative proposals as well as rates and see if we can go on a constructive basis. There's no guarantee we will all agree or disagree, but I think hitting everybody with a rate hike is terrible timing. And I think a more constructive approach is trying to work together to see what goals might be achieved so we don't have the continuous situation of actuary issues versus rates. So this again is State Representative Todd Hunter, and we appreciate you hearing the public comment today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Hunter, for your comment. Is there anyone else who wishes to make a public comment? I do see another hand that was raised, so give me just a moment to make adjustments for that. It looks like that individual lowered their hand. We'll give just one more moment. Anyone else that wishes to make public comment? Seeing none, I want to thank everyone for their participation. I will now turn the meeting back over to the committee chair.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone that spoke today. We appreciate your involvement. And also thank you to everyone that wrote in their public comment. We did receive those and read them, and we appreciate that as well. We are now going to move to the presentation by Willis Towers Watson. We started this process, I believe, back in February of picking a firm to do both modeling and actuarial independent review for us. And Willis Towers Watson is here with us today to take us through their findings. I hope we have a lot of questions for them and a good discussion. If this goes longer than the 30 minutes on the agenda, that's totally fine. We can talk as long as we need to. So with that, I'll turn it over to Willis Towers Watson.
Good morning. This is Lisa Succo from Willis Towers Watson. We have a few slides to share to highlight some of the aspects of our report. Throughout, we'll be referring to pages of the report for more detail. Christina, could you advance to the next slide? Here is a summary of the rate indications that we developed. So starting at the bottom are the indications based on the RMS and the error models. And then we are recommending a 25-75% weighting, 25% error, 75% RMS to come up with a 42% indication based on the hurricane models. And then when you, and the indication based on the actual historical experience is 21%. And then we weighted those 50-50 to come up with a total indication of 32%. Those are all the residential numbers that I'm quoting, and then you can see the commercial numbers on the right there. Christina, could you go to the next slide? So we're going to just cover some of the highlights of some of the differences between our indication and the TWIA indications. And I'm going to go a little bit off slide here. I'll talk for a few minutes about the actuarial parts of the indication, and then some of my colleagues will talk more about the modeling aspects. So one of the things that's not on the slide is the hurricane frequency. So for the historical experience, what is done is there is a not a loss ratio that's developed for the hurricane years, and then the non-hurricane loss ratio is subtracted from that. Everything is done on a year basis. So we felt it was more appropriate to switch from using the frequency of a hurricane to the frequency of a hurricane year because of the way the loss ratios are used based on a year basis. So that lowered the indication. It lowered the hurricane hurricane year frequency from 0.379 to 0.32, and that lowered the indication a bit. Another change was the debt repayment. This is part of the expense ratio. We used the actual amount that is due on the debt for 2021, but we ratioed it to earned premium at current rate level. With that ratio, we're just trying to get an apples to apples comparison between the debt payment and the premium. And TWIA does a little bit of trending on that premium that's in the denominator. So that also lowered the debt repayment ratio from 19.7 to 17.1, and that also lowered the indication. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the last bullet on the slide, the LAE calculation. We simplified the calculation for the loss adjustment expense. We separated into a hurricane portion and a non-hurricane portion. For the hurricane portion, there was only data for the latest 2 storms to come up with the ratio. So it's a very limited amount of data that we're using. And then for the non-hurricane loss adjustment expense ratio, we just used data from the annual statement and made it a little simpler than what it has in the past. That actually raised the loss adjustment expense ratio slightly and had a slight upward impact on the indication, although it was small. And now I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Jade Nguyen, who's going to talk a little bit more about the RMS and AIR results.
Hi, it's Jade Nguyen. So the details of the reasons why we chose a 75 RMS and 25% AIR can be found in the report, but I'm just going to summarize some of the key components here. So in terms of frequency, our comparison of the hurricane frequency by cat size for Texas shows that RMS is closer to historic frequency than AIR overall. RMS is about 6% within the historical, while the delta in AIR is about 30%. And the differences vary by cat size. While we understand that both models extrapolate from historical data where events are limited, we think that the delta in AIR is a little excessive. And then on the severity side, we review it in context of each model's method and assumptions for determining the damage functions and how sensitive each model is to the user input. Development of the damage functions for unknown risk characteristics by region is more specific to Texas under RMS than in AIR. In RMS, Texas is a vulnerability region on its own and further categorized by inland versus coastal, while AIR groups Texas with 2 other states, Louisiana and Mississippi. TWIA captures all of the primary risk characteristics, but not secondary risk characteristics. So this is relevant because how each model utilizes their building inventory to determine damage functions for the unknowns, particularly from a regional aspects, is a good indicator for which model is better suited for TWIA portfolio. This is evident in the modeled loss cost maps of TWIA results we included in the report that you can reference on page 42, which shows that there are more regional variation in loss costs under RMS than AIR at the postal code level. In terms of the damage function methodologies implemented for each of the 5 primary risk characteristics, for example, AIR does not consider number of stories for TWIA residential business. And as it relates to square footage, 93% of TWIA's residential business would be subject to the same vulnerability treatment in AIR model. So this indicates that AIR is less sensitive to TWIA input model than RMS, and which suggests to us that AIR is a little bit relatively more broad brush approach than RMS in calculating losses for TWIA. I'll turn over to Prasad to talk about the next 2 components that we looked at.
All right, good morning. The next components of the model validation are associated to loss validation of historical events. For this validation, we looked at all the available historical events in the Gulf region and then also specific to Texas. As you can see in the page 35, we compare the model output both from RMS and AIR at the industry level with respect to ISOs or the various PCS loss estimates. Oftentimes, these loss estimates include reports from companies, the member companies of the PCS, We see some sort of holes in the sense of sometimes for particular storms, some companies might not be reporting loss to PCS. That's one uncertainty or uncertain factor associated to that historical actual loss number industry-wide. And then also the other factor is some of these events are more than 20, 30 years old. The insurance penetration changed significantly since then to today. And then also the exposure growth in terms of number of total buildings available are existing on the ground. We do have some methods to quantify that insurance growth as well as the penetration rates over the years. However, there seems some uncertainty in those calculations. Having a look at all those uncertainties associated with industry loss estimates as well as the projection of previous years historical loss to current day dollars, between RMS and AIR, we feel that RMS is somewhat close to historical observations with respect to overall industry losses compared to AIR. Again, it's in comparison to AIR. And we also looked at other company-specific loss estimates for recent storms, including Ike and others. I think RMS seems kind of showing a better correlation of the model losses with respect to actual experience. Some of the details are provided in page 35 of our report. Second element of it is using the long-term hurricane rates or the near-term hurricane rates. We propose using long-term hurricane rates given the differences in methodology between RMS and AIR, how one can forecast that near-term rates. Sometimes that near-term rates are treated as the hurricane view for the next 5 years. Just to give you an example of that one, if you look at this year, we had a record number of hurricane events in the Atlantic as of now, but only few of them made landfall. But are we able to forecast this within the models? Probably not to an extent where we want it to be. Given the limitations of those near-term models, the models are not able to provide year-over-year variability in hurricane losses. That's why we think that it might be better off using the long-term, which is using the last 100+ years of historical data based view of hurricane rates in rate calculations. The details of that approach are furnished in page 25, 26, and so on as well.
Yeah, so just to kind of round it out a little bit. So given our analysis leads to a more favorable leaning towards RMS, we landed on a 75-25 mix based on some key considerations. First, continuing to use a 50-50 mix would not reflect our analysis conclusion that RMS is a better fit. At the same time, we continue to strongly believe that a multi-model approach is beneficial for several reasons, including there's still a high degree of uncertainty that Prasad mentioned in both models. And just because RMS is a better fit doesn't necessarily invalidate AIR. There are limitations to our analysis, including lack of detailed historical hurricane data from TWIA for loss validation. Our analysis is based on the current models, but models tend to go through periodic updates. But it's not practical to switch back and forth between models year after year. So we believe that a 75-25 allows us to sufficiently recognize RMS for being a better fit for TWIA while continuing to incorporate multiple views of risk by a 25% weight assigned to AIR. So next, I'm going to talk about our removal of the storm surge provision from rate filings. So basically, since TWIA policy covers wind only, we recommend just completely leaving it out of the rate filing. This is consistent with most companies that offer wind only coverage. It would also correspond to wind only moderate losses that guide TWIA reinsurance purchase. This is not to say that there's no risk that TWIA would end up paying some of the storm surge losses, but we think the disputes related to wind versus flood can be accounted for via non-moderate loss expense load. At the same time, Texas statute does not prohibit TWIA from including storm surge loss provision. So should TWIA choose to continue to do this, we do have a couple of alternative approaches to estimating this provision, which we highlight on our report on page 48. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, but I won't go over it here. So next up, Alicia will talk about reinsurance provision.
Perfect. Thanks, Jade. This is Alicia Gertie, and I'm focusing on the second main bullet, which is the updated reinsurance provision. So as Jade mentioned and in summary, the impact of using the long-term view and the 75% weight to RMS and our recommended 17.2% LAE load that Lisa referenced before. The 1 in 100 PML for TWIA drops from 4.2 billion to 3.74 billion. And that is essentially $460 million less than the current methodology. And you can find that on page 52. To estimate the difference in cost associated with that $460 million less reinsurance limit, we used an assumption of 3.6% rate on line, which was verified as reasonable by the TWIA staff. The end result would be an estimated overall savings on reinsurance of roughly $16.8 million, and that is also noted on page 52. So bringing that forward to the rate indication as it relates to Exhibit 11.2, which flows into the fixed expenses, our recommendation is to calculate the cost of reinsurance individually for each of residential and commercial business, since they are indeed two separate filings. So commercial business represents 18% of the gross AAL according to RMS, and residential represents 82% of the gross AAL according to RMS, and you can see that on page 39. Because of this mix of business within the gross AAL, we allocated the reinsurance layer AAL and the reinsurance cost using these respective percentages. And when you put those dollars over the earned premium at current rate levels, the net reinsurance cost for commercial is 17.9%, and the net reinsurance cost for residential business is 15.8%. Again, those figures are found in Exhibit 11.2. Does compare to current methodology, which would be an 18.7% net cost of reinsurance for each of commercial and residential. So with that, I think we'll advance to the next slide, and I'll pass it over to Alan Cashin.
Yeah, it's Alan Cashin at Wilson in Dallas as well. This is just a summary from page 21. I think it brings it all together. So we've got the column that says TWIA's current approach. That just kind of summarizes the current approach with all the metrics on the left. So like Prasad and Jay talked about, it's the model weights, long-term, medium-term, the loss adjustment expense assumptions, storm surge, and so forth as you go down. So I think the two columns to note are the last two on the right. So TWIA's current approach versus the Willis Towers Watson recommendation. And we've gone through a lot of these, but I think it's just important to put it in the PowerPoint and reference that. Again, it's page 21 of the written report. Alicia mentioned the key items as it respects to the reinsurance program. The reinsurance limit, or I guess the ground up total 1 in 100 PML determination of 3.7 billion, and then the impact on the cost and the actual rate filing. So I don't think if there's any other questions on this, we're happy to go through it, but again, it's just a summary of what's in the report. In our last slide, we wanted to just talk about a few recommendations on future enhancements. So I think Jade's going to go through a few first.
Yes, I won't necessarily go through in that order. So first, I'll talk about the geocoding resolution that we found. So in general, TWIA TWIA data is, you know, consistent with other companies that we have seen in terms of the geocoding resolution. Overall, it's about 89% geocoded to street level. But we do see that for 2 counties, all of the addresses are provided at postal code level only. These are the Cameron and San Patricio County, which makes up about 9% of TWIA risk count. So we believe that, you know, it's worth the effort if you could try to capture data at address level in the future. And then on the second primary risk characteristics side, you know, as noted, TWIA capture of the 5 primary risk characteristics, being the occupancy, year built, construction, square footage, and stories. 96% of TWIA locations contain all 5 of these. So from this perspective, TWIA data quality is very good. But there are 2 areas that we noted within the primary characteristics that can be improved. First is the commercial business. In the data that we receive is just noted as commercial without really breaking it down into, you know, what type of commercial business that is. So, you know, both RMS and AIR have commercial subtypes for commercial business, and the damageability for these subtypes are different. So currently we model as general commercial, which reflects a mix of these different subtypes. But to the extent that TWIA could provide, you know, more detailed occupancy information, we believe that the model losses could be improved in a sense that it would be more accurate. We don't know if it would be, you know, lower or higher. It really depends on what the underlying occupancy is. For example, you know, is it restaurants, parking garages, education, retail store, etc. So, you know, the most vulnerable would be like gasoline stations, followed by office buildings, and then parking garages. So how the, you know, model losses would look like really depends on, you know, what kind of information we receive at the detail level. And then the second part, which is really a tiny portion of the overall portfolio, but we think that, you know, if it's available, it should be captured as well. So that is related to the mobile home. Right now, we just know that it's a mobile home, but there's no distinction between, you know, whether that mobile home is tied down or, you know, it doesn't have tied down. So if that is available, we think that going forward, TWIA should also capture that information. And that really makes a big difference, you know, whether a mobile home has tie downs or not. And then next, I'll move on to the secondary risk characteristics. So as I think everyone's aware, TWIA doesn't capture secondary risk characteristics at the moment. So we modeled some options for TWIA portfolio to show, you know, the potential range of impacts certain modifiers could have to the model losses. Some of the, you know, examples of secondary modifiers would be, you know, construction quality of the home, the roof geometry, roof anchors, roof age, roof cover. So these are the things that we looked at for TWIA just to see the impact. In general, there's less impact under AIR model than in RMS. Note that in our report, the loss impact we showed under construction quality, roof geometry, and roof anchors assumes that all of TWIA's portfolio would have 100% of that particular secondary risk type. To show a more realistic assessment of the impact to TWIA portfolio, we modeled roof age and roof cover by considering a combination of options within the modifier, rather than modeling everything as, you know, having the same characteristics. So the changes, you know, when you look at the impact at the location level, you know, like for example, if the construction shows and is an obvious signs of deterioration, the loss could increase by as much as 60%. While if the construction of that home is, you know, certified and designed, it would decrease the loss by about 14%. So, you know, we don't really know, we don't have the data to really, you know, understand the impact to TWIA portfolio. So I think it's something, but overall, when we look at the, you know, when we did the modeling using a more realistic assessment of TWIA portfolio, for example, with the roof age, we model it based, you know, we kind of did some assumptions about, you know, what the roof age may be based on the year built. For that, RMS loss for the overall TWIA portfolio is about 1% of the current model losses, and error decrease about, roughly about the same. So in general, we don't think that it is too punitive currently, that TWIA doesn't capture that, but at the same time, these are assumptions that we make, based on year built, and it's just roof age. We think that it's still worthwhile to pursue capturing more risk data characteristics if possible.
Yeah, thanks, Jade. I'll jump in. So just to wrap this up with a couple more points on this slide. This, again, we were provided the same file that that TWIA gives to the reinsurance market. So I think when we got into this, the committee had asked us to specifically talk about data quality and how to improve the data quality that's currently given in the market. So this is referencing page 58 through 60. So in most cases, in talking to staff, TWIA already has the data in the claim system and the policy admin system. You just can't extract it and get it out and use it. So just a couple examples in this. We talk about data extraction. Like Jade said, it's improving the location level risk characteristics across the portfolio. So this could be extracting data from old inspection reports, engineering reports, WPIA8s. Could be old claims files from Ike or Harvey. When you look at like Ike was over 100,000, Ike and Dolly, 100,000 claims, almost half the TWIA portfolio, and Harvey was, I think, 70-something thousand claims. So there's a lot of data, right? I mean, TWIA is paying people to go look at these properties, and there is data available. You just can't extract it and use it for normal business purposes, like Jade mentioned. Like WPIA, I think there was 16,000 in 2008, and 50% of them, I think that's coming from a TWIA board packet. 50% were re-roofs, which required a WPIA. So getting that data and using it to your benefit is really important. One example that Jade mentioned was roof type. I think that's important. We won't go into in a lot of detail, but just understanding the roof age, whether a property was repaired with wind-resistant shingles, wind-resistant anchors, is really important to reduce the overall expected loss of a property and just get more accurate information on the property. So those secondary modifiers are really important. And the last thing, like Jade mentioned, you don't know if secondary modifiers are going to increase the expected loss or decrease until you actually get the data. The one thing we are confident in is that wind mitigation protections will decrease the expected loss on a single property or across a portfolio. In just some brief discussions with staff, I don't think the data is captured. It's not given to reinsurers. There's no assumptions that are made. You basically allow the model to determine whether a property has wind protections, and the model does do that. For example, in Texas Tier 1, RMS assumes 60% does not have protections. Again, we're talking about protections on doors and windows and so forth. And that 60% number does vary by many different factors, like height of the building, year build, etc. But generally, I'm saying that to say that the models do make an assumption, but I think better data can improve that. So in knowing that the ARC guidelines, and that's been revised by TDI, if you're in Seaward or Inland 1, you have to have wind mitigation protections. There are a lot of exceptions to that, but generally, if you're in Seaward and Inland 1, you have to have that to be TWIA insured. So whether you're able to capture the data or make some really reasonable assumptions, I think is a prudent approach. Having this would, as we described in the report, it would reduce the PML. When you reduce the PML, it reduces reinsurance costs because you actually give this data to reinsurers and have them model it, and brings down the expected loss. So just in closing, I'd say, these are just two methods, whether it's using artificial intelligence to get it from old files or actually capturing it in the future, or just making really reasonable assumptions, would reduce the overall PML and likely reduce the reinsurance costs. So that's our presentation. I'll hand it back over to Lisa if she has any closing comments.
Thank you, Alan. Christina, could you advance to the last slide? That's the end of our overview of the highlights of our report, and now we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, all of you. That was excellent. It is such a big report. There's so much detail. We very much appreciate all the effort that went into this. We may have a lot of questions. I don't know, but I wanted to start off with a comment, and maybe I can kind of start this going, and then I hope other members of the committee will chime in. Regarding the shift from a 50-50 weighting of the models to 75 RMS, 25 AIR. I know we've questioned you about this prior to the meeting. You felt very strongly about it. I'm going to make a summary comment, but please tell me if I've missed the boat here. So TWIA's portfolio is comprised of a lot of older homes. We have a majority of the book is older homes, and the RMS model is more refined when it comes to building characteristics. That's the statement I think I want to ask if that's correct. So when we capture this additional data, we can get a more refined look at our book because we have more information about the building itself, whereas AIR rates more on the age of the structure and less on the characteristics of that structure. Would that be a correct statement?
I think it would be correct to say that AIR is more punitive for the older homes. And in general, the methodology that AIR utilizes to come up with damage functions is a little bit more broad brush, like I mentioned earlier, meaning like a lot of your exposure would have the same treatment. So RMS is more refined in that sense. It breaks it down into different brackets, more so than AIR.
Okay, thank you. And along that vein, the interesting thing, it's kind of jumped out at me, on the frequency of storms. I know the committee has talked a lot about the historical frequency versus the models. And the interesting part, and I sent some to page 27 of your report, is that the frequency of the bigger storms is really consistent between RMS, AIR, and the history. It's that's bigger storms, category 3 to 5. But it was in the smaller storms where they varied quite a bit, where RMS and history was comparable, but AIR was quite a bit higher. I just found it interesting that the difference would be so much in the smaller storms instead of what I was expecting in the bigger storms. I don't know if you have a comment on that, but I just found that to be an interesting outcome of the frequency study.
Yeah, I think just to comment on that one, in general, smaller storms might be a little bit tougher, but they have a bigger data sample to simulate these storms, right? So you might assume that they may have a common viewpoint on the smaller storms. But based on how they treat these storms and then how much impact they can have on the overall average annual loss, rather than at 1 in 100 and above, we see that's where the difference is in general. That's what we see across other regions. If you look at other states such as Carolinas, we still see a bigger difference at category 3s and 5s, but in Mississippi Gulf, that's where at the smaller storms they see a difference in there. It's all depending on how they simulate these storms. Overall, some might be simulating more category 3s and 5s to get the better view of the risk at 1 in 100. Others might be doing more of the category 1s and 2 to get a better view of the average annual losses. It's a modeling trick that they play to get close to the historical observations.
Right. Thank you. I would like to see if other committee members or board members attending would like to jump in with a question on indications, modeling, or the data enhancements. Anything is open at this point.
Hi, Debbie. This is Corice Morrison. Yeah, I have a couple of questions for some clarity. First off, for the indications that that Willis Towers Watson is proposing or presenting here. So I just want to be clear, the hurricane model proposal is plus with this 25-75 split that considers all of the other items that y'all summarized for us. That's the plus 42 on residential and plus 49 on commercial. Is that correct? Is that the primary indication, I guess, that you're presenting based on your review of the data?
Grace, that's correct. If you were just basing the indication on hurricane models and not weighing in actual experience, it would be the 42 and the 49, and that includes every other change that we've talked about.
Okay, and so the actual experience then is the 21. Okay, I get it. Okay, thank you. So then my other question also is about, I guess, the summary that we received at the end there, which was very helpful, and I appreciate that. And again, thank Lisa and to your entire team, thank you for all the work you've put into this. It's very helpful. About the data and the additional recommendations y'all are making on ways to improve our data for this review. I guess maybe some of my question might be to John Pollock and staff. What would it take to get some of that that data cleared up, so we would have better information, let's again to, geocoded addresses for Cameron and San Patricio counties, occupancy data for commercial, mobile home data of tied down or not, the roof age, geometry, cover. Some of those that were just kind of summarized for us by Jade and Alan, is that possible to get that? And is the reason we don't have that now is because it was not available, or is because Willis, y'all, Lisa, y'all felt like you ran out of time?
Well, let me turn that question over to Jim Murphy. Jim, of all the people on the staff on the call, has been with us the longest and has gone through these issues in the past with our reinsurance. So perhaps he's better equipped to answer those questions. Jim?
Thanks, John. Carice, I think the quick answer to your question is that we can get a lot of this information fairly quickly. As Willis pointed out, a lot of this is available, just not necessarily in the system that we usually report from. It's in other systems that would need to be kind of bridged across, but that can definitely be done. I think that there are already plans underway for the commercial occupancy. That's data that we have not previously or historically collected, but it's already part of our Elevate project to obtain that information from agents. They should already have it from the underlying policy. So that's underway. The roof cover we actually do have. I think Willis kind of alluded to that in the report, that they had it from a prior, I guess it wasn't really engagement, it was the RFP process from a few years ago. And the data we have actually is very similar to the default data in the models. It's only a couple of points off, I think. And so that's something that we can absolutely include. It may not make a big difference, but I think in the spirit of getting as accurate as possible, and that's definitely one step that we can take. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to mentally go down the list of things. The mobile homes, we do have an underwriting requirement that all mobile homes have to be tied down. So that one is very quickly solved. I think that's just slightly changing the fields that we submit with the information to let the models know that they're all tied down. It's not a big part of the business, but it's definitely a quick win for us. And then I think some of the other stuff that we don't have as solid information on, the roof shape. We have, in the last few years, partnered with EagleView to get a lot of additional information that we had not historically had. And I think that there's an opportunity there to pull in roof shape from the information that EagleView collects. I think that the roof age is something that can be done as well. The inspection reports, or I shouldn't say inspection, sorry, the WP8 certificates, whenever there's a roof repair, that can be done. There's a little bit of kind of finessing that'll need to be done, trying to distinguish between a partial roof repair and a complete roof replace, and how we want to handle that when reporting it to the modelers, but absolutely something that can be done. And I apologize if I left anything out. I think that's the extent of my short-term memory.
And Carice, just so you know, it wasn't due to time constraints that, we didn't pull in some of that other data. It's just the data wasn't readily available. Like Jim said, you'd have to piece it together a bit.
But we
This is
did
Jerry
use the
Fadden.
same
I would just,
data that was used in the reinsurance market, just to be clear. And that's the assumptions we made are in the beginning of the report.
Alan, can you just say that again? We missed the beginning.
Yeah, in the beginning of the report, I just want to be clear, all of the modeling assumptions we made is what was made in the past, including this year, except for one related to the limit and the building value. So I just want to be clear, that was our starting point. We modeled it the same way it has been modeled in the past.
Can I make a comment about our data, please?
Yes, Georgia, thank you. Go ahead.
While we say a bulk of our properties are residential properties or older properties, many of those properties were either hit by Ike or Harvey and have since been repaired, and all of, even the ones that are grandfathered before 1988, still have a roof certification. I think it's called BC 1085. And so, and we certainly have the age of those roofs, because anything that's old, TWIA has been, at least what the agents tell me, has been very effective in checking any older structure for the age and condition of the roof. We also, construction quality, have to build on the coast to a higher standard of building code and comply with that WPIA. And personally, I'm kind of flabbergasted that after the consumer spends the money to qualify and have engineers and spend what is shown to be at least 30% more than inland on construction to meet those codes, that we don't have them all in our data and all available to reduce our cost of reinsurance and our probable maximum loss.
Georgia, this is Chandra. To add to that, I mean, basically, when they're renewing, aren't the agents checking to make sure they have those WPIA 8s already in place? I mean, that's my understanding, is that the agents are checking to make sure before they renew that it's in place, or if they have a timeline in order to complete it. So we could assume that everything that we're insuring has a valid WPI 8 on any repairs that have been done since, or if it's after, you said after 1988, after that cutoff, that it has met that criteria, that higher criteria. So we're it's like, why are we not getting credit for that?
Our properties are more resilient after the last two storms. Our book of business is more resilient. And it seems to me, I mean, maybe I'll address this to you, Alan, because, it seems to me that if we were actually reflecting our book of business, that there would be a significant reduction in our reinsurance cost.
I think there would be. I don't know that the level it would be, but you can reduce the limit by 10%, and like we said earlier, put a PML or a rate on line of 3.5, 4.5 rate on line for that limit, whatever you think it would be. But we would have to do the analysis.
So just to jump in, what is the best way, and maybe this is for Jim or Alan, whichever, there was a sensitivity analysis in the report that I think is really important for everyone to kind of reference. I don't know if we want to pull it up, maybe Lisa, but it shows various building characteristics and the potential difference it could make by having that data available. So there were a couple that were pretty impactful, being the exterior opening protection, which is part of the WPIA. So I'm kind of focusing on that at the moment, but what would be the best way to get an accurate reading of that or accounting of that in what's on the homes today? Just So going back to your point, Georgia, where after a storm, it could be built back to a stronger building code. I'm just curious, how do we capture that? What's the best way to capture that?
Are you talking to me?
You can answer, Alan. Yeah, if that's.
Well, I think it's also a question for Jim and the staff on what can actually be captured. I understand. I think I understand it's not captured as far as the WPA, but if you're surcharging them, or there's a credit, or just on year build, whatever the case is, you can either use artificial intelligence to get it out of the system, right? Or you can just make really reasonable assumptions. And when you give reasonable assumptions to reinsurers, they will generally take it into account. Otherwise, they would use punitive assumptions. So I think whether it's AI and technology, or if there's a way to make some reasonable assumptions based on conversations with Jim and John and the staff.
So if we do this, we would want to make sure that we get credit with the reinsurers. So that's good to know, but they would actually use an assumption rather than that we actually found the information somehow.
Yeah, I mean, if you give reinsurers data, they will use it. Now, they may not give you 100% of the credit. Every reinsurer is different. It's a marketplace, so maybe they don't. Maybe they give you 80%. Maybe they do give you 100%. But at least you're getting some credit with the improved location level risk characteristics.
If I could step in real quick, this is Corey. So Alan, you're saying we're not getting any credit for that today. So probably there's maybe a punitive factor happening, or is that?
Yeah, I wasn't involved in the reinsurance discussions. All I know is we modeled the file the same exact manner as it has been modeled earlier this year. With the one difference being that's noted in the early part of the report, which made a very small difference, less than 1%. But I wasn't involved in the reinsurance discussion, so I don't know if that was communicated or not.
And this is Alicia Gertie. I would just add that also I believe that policyholders get a credit if they have those protections. But again, you're not getting the credit for that based on what we modeled, based on the data that we received.
Mm-hmm.
So the policyholder is getting a credit, but you're not getting one on the back end.
Mm-hmm. So and that flows through to the reinsurance cost, the PML, and obviously the rate indication. It affects all three. I just wanted to point that out.
Yes.
Debbie, can I ask a quick
Sure.
clarifying question?
Go ahead, Jim. Yeah.
And I'm not sure to whom at Willis this is best answered, but or asked. The models have assumptions. So for example, if we take, I think we've talked about exterior opening protection a few times, and that one has a pretty big impact. The models have a default, is that correct? I think I heard like 60-40 or 50-50 depending on the year built. So if that's the case and the exterior opening protections are currently unreported in our exposure file to the models, the model results assume that 50-50 or that 60-40, and the results as presented to the reinsurers have that 50-50, 60-40 built in. So if we went through a process and we successfully identified, I'm sure not all, but a large portion of our risks as to whether or not they actually do have exterior opening protections, the difference in the model results, the difference in the reinsurance price would be the difference between what we actually have and the 50-50 assumption?
Correct. So the model right now sounds like it's a little bit more too punitive, like that 60% is overstated in terms of no opening protections. So
sorry.
Go ahead.
This is Jerry Fatton. Let me just add that, let me just first ask Alan whether, what portion of his insurance company clients capture secondary modifiers?
I would say 100% capture some secondary modifiers, and a large majority capture the top secondary modifiers. I think there's 4 or 5 depending on the model.
I think that's different than what we discussed privately, that most companies don't capture secondary modifiers, but that's good to know. And just to clarify, the models, both RMS and AIR make assumptions about secondary modifiers. They do have default assumptions, and they incorporate the building codes in effect for the year built for a particular building or dwelling, and they also consider the relative enforcement of building codes in that area. So, I think Jim's point is a good one, which is we're really talking about the difference between the specific information that we might obtain versus the default assumption that's in the model. And in that regard, I would also say that with respect to your preference for RMS over air, while air groups Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi together, their building vulnerability is based on the individual location and year built and building code enforcement in that particular location. So while it's grouped and aggregated with other states, that doesn't influence their calculation of individual damage function for a house in Galveston. But I don't want to necessarily debate models, but I just wanted to put the secondary modifier issue in context in terms of the extent to which it will influence the PML output.
So just back to that opening protection, like let's say it's accurate that inland 1 and seaward area are supposed to have opening protections, right? That's the majority of your exposure there. So RMS is, saying that 60% of them don't have opening protection. So I think that delta would be significant enough to make impactful change, decrease to your model losses. If that statement were accurate, that inland 1 and seaward area have opening protection by law, or as required by.
I think it's covered by the model based on my conversations with RMS and AIR, but we'll look
well,
into
it is
that
covered
further.
based on that assumption, but it's not as precise as TWIA would be, as TWIA is required to.
Yes, I agree.
This is Corey. So to kind of clear this up, I think I'm curious about what it would take and how long it would take to get this data either captured or made appropriate assumptions different from what's there today, where we could then ask TWIA staff to do that, provide that back to Willis, and we could come back and look at a revised indication that captured at least as much data as we possibly could. Is that feasible to do within a few weeks? I mean, I know our board meeting that I know we want to be able to have something back to the board meeting is December 8th. I know there's timing requirements and certainly proper notice and whatnot needs to happen. So I know we are getting closer and closer to, a condensed timeline, but I'm wondering, do we have enough time in the calendar for some additional review and information to be prepared and sent back to Willis readjust, and our committee come back and look at a revised report that captures as much of this information and to fill the gaps, if you will, that we have right now?
I don't think it's a matter of, this is Jerry Fadden again, I don't think it's a matter of a couple of weeks, but I just wanted to point out we do have an initiative underway, including claims and underwriting and actuarial, to try to see what's available. As was mentioned earlier, we do have aerial photography of all of our risks from Eagle View, and we can capture. We hope to be able to translate that information into digital information that can feed the model data with respect to roof shape. There may be information on WPI8s that's available, but that is not in an electronic form that we could easily use. Alan mentioned artificial intelligence to access some of this information that's in claims files. That's having been involved in similar projects, that's not a quick undertaking and certainly not a matter of weeks. But we have as a strategic initiative a data strategy and including data governance, and we have as a project that's going on right now efforts to better populate the data. better populate our systems with whatever data is available, whether it's internally or public sourced data.
Correce, if you wanted to put it in a motion that we gather the data that we can gather in time, the WPIAs, an awful lot of them are online at TDI. And if you have a WPIA, it says that you have complied with certain standards in order to get that WPIA. So you can look by address on the TDI website and get an awful lot of WPIAs. In the period of time where we wrote the WPIAs, we should have that readily available. So if you would, and I would like to get that data to Willis so that they could have use of it and not use default to company assumptions that may or may not recognize the building codes that are in Tier 1 counties. So if you want to make a motion, or I'll make the motion if you'd like to second it, Correce, that we provide as much of the data that we're missing that we can possibly provide in time to Willis Re to incorporate and get back to us in such time that we could have another meeting before the December 8th board meeting.
Yeah, this is Correce. I'm glad to make that motion. I think we probably need to, though, maybe work first with maybe Mike Perkins. You can help us build out the timeline here so we have that really clearly understood, that when we would need to, how much time we have and what window we have that would allow our committee to come back together with proper public notice, as well as the board to come back together with proper public notice.
I think one thing we're facing too, Correce, is don't we provide information to the reinsurers in November? Is that correct?
I think that's right.
We provide data based on, as of November 30th each year to do the modeling, and we provide that same and then the model output is provided to the board at the February meeting, typically.
Well, is the November 30th a drop dead number? Because I would be willing to amend my motion that said that we do this data collection and transference to Willis to incorporate in the models in such time as we could have the models available to us at the February meeting, February 2021, which gives us a little more time, Correce.
I'm curious about, again, the timing on that from staff. And Mike, in the short term, if we were able to, if staff was able to work over the next month and we still are able to meet by the end of October or the first week of November, that should give us enough time then to review that information and take action, whatever that might be, our committee, right, by the 1st of November or the week of the 1st of November, to get that then back to for December.
Yes, Ms. Morrison, I think that's fine. We have I think we have about 80 days, maybe 70 days until the TWI board meeting. Generally, the pattern that we have to follow under statute is we need 11 days notice of a meeting to be published. And so with sort of those two numbers as our guideline, I think you do have enough time as long as you get going.
So Georgia, I would rather at least attempt this before we punt all the way to February, personally.
That's good by me. If you'll make the motion, I'd be happy to second it.
Okay. See, and Mike, you can help me craft this motion, but I'd like to make a motion that TWIA staff work with Willis Towers Watson staff to identify the needed data that was provided or summarized to our committee here in the report today, to so that Willis Towers Watson can consider that data in an adjusted report back to our actuary committee for a meeting of our committee to take place the first week of November. And
Ms. Morrison, that data is data regarding what's been referred to as secondary characteristics regarding individual insured structures. Is that correct?
It's, I think if we go to that one page, it's like one page before this slide that we're seeing on our system right now.
One, I think.
I think it's right before this one. It was the, I don't know who's controlling the slides right now, but.
And I think what I'm trying to understand from the intent of your motion, Ms. Morrison, is whether you and Ms. Neblett want staff to work with Willis to capture data broadly regarding these secondary characteristics, or whether we're focused exclusively on the coverings issue, shutters and other things like that, because that's really what we talk most about. I just want to be sure staff understands what they need to collect.
Yeah, and that's what
I'd like we had as much as possible.
Right, that's my
As
point.
much
I'd like to go to that slide if we can, that summarize the data. Thank you, right here, right?
This slide?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
This is what I'm referencing. What about others? As much of all of this that we can get between now and that November meeting.
That's my second.
Okay.
Debbie, this is Alan Cashin. I just have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that like this modeling sensitivity analysis is outside the scope of the original RFP and proposal for the rate filing.
Right.
Just want to make sure that's clear. So any additional modeling work we'd have to check our license restrictions with RMS and AR, as well as talk to our management team on a new engagement. We don't represent TWIA for the reinsurance placement, so there are modeling restrictions associated with this type of work.
Yeah, can you expand on that a little bit, Alan? I know we discussed that earlier today, actually, that we may need to get a limited license with RMS and AIR to do further analysis.
So TWIA doesn't license the hurricane model, and Willis obviously does, but we don't represent TWIA for reinsurance placement. So this type of analysis, the model sensitivity, would require a restricted license that we would talk to RMS and AR and come back within the next day or two for a cost associated with that analysis.
Mm-hmm. I know this has been an issue with our current broker as well. I know, Jerry, you've been checking into licensing with the modelers. So I think it's good to know what that costs so that we can consider that in this process and to finish out this analysis and future analysis. This would also benefit any broker that provides us information that they've not been able to in the past.
And I think that meets the intent of what this committee was asked to do. So if the cost is not outrageous, I would ask Corrice to include in her motion that we cover whatever that cost is to do this additional work.
Yeah, I'm fine amending my motion to include that. I just want to make sure that everybody understands, staff as well. Debbie, is that what you were mentioning as well?
Yes, I just wanted to, Alan, for mentioning the licensing. We may have to work through that. And one question back to you, Alan, if we did go down that road of licensing, is that pretty quick so it wouldn't slow down this process? Since we are
no, from a timing perspective, we could talk to RMS and AR within the next 48 hours and come back with a proposal to the committee.
Okay.
An exact cost amount for this analysis. And then from a timing perspective, I believe it would take at least 2 weeks, probably no more than 4, but we can confirm that after we get the data from staff and then get the results back to the committee and the board.
So 2 to 4 weeks. So if we gave 30 days to get the data, it would actually be the end of November when we could review the output. Is that kind of what
That's correct. And we can come back with the proposal and confirm the timing of that.
Could we consider about, given obviously the first week of November is election week, so we want to stay off that. Is there a possibility then, and Mike, if we would meeting the week of November 16th, and I'm talking our committee, obviously, meet the week of November 16th, would that maybe give us all enough time for this, as well as still meet obviously all our public notice requirements?
Yes, ma'am. And if I think just trying to distill from what I've heard from your remarks and Ms. Nevillett's, the motion that seems to be taking shape here is that a motion that the committee direct the TWIA staff to work with the Willis Towers Watson staff to gather information as described on the future enhancements slide today, to the extent that is possible, to permit analysis and review by this committee at a meeting to be held the week of November 16th. And then if you phrase your motion that way, then I would think that the TWI staff and the Willis Towers Watson staff can work together to size the project, if you will, in terms of a level of detail that would permit a result in time for your meeting. And you could just leave it to their judgment and initiative to make those sort of granular decisions about how much we can work in.
As well as then any agreements needed with modelers? Is that?
Yes, ma'am. And I thought I've understood Mr. Cashin to indicate that the size of that could be determined within the next day or two, and presumably any action taken shortly thereafter.
This is Chandra. Is there a way that we can add in there maybe a not to exceed pricing that would go ahead and approve kind of by the committee of pricing for this additional scope, so that we can adjust maybe the amount of things that we capture in that time frame based on the budget that you guys approve?
Well, let me ask, do we even, our committee, have the authority to do this budget item?
I don't know.
Ms. Morrison, that sort of circles back to comment Ms. Neville made about 5 or 6 minutes ago, that her view is that the spirit or concept of this analysis point is within the charge the committee was given. And so if a majority of the other committee members share that view, then I think that probably is your answer to Ms. Franklin Womack's point. You know, one of the problems with setting a budget is the difficulty in knowing what it should be. My understanding, and Mr. Fadden Murphy or Cashin could jump in here if they have a different thought, is that there are really two components here with cost. One would be any cost for a narrow or limited license to get additional rights from the modeler, and the other cost would be just rate times time with respect to Willis Towers Watson's work.
Yeah, I'm willing to make that motion. I think Mike, you read it pretty well. So yeah, I'm fine. But I want to ask, the week of the 16th of November, that seems to work? I know we could try the week of November 30th, but I think that's too close, probably. So.
Well, you know, Corice, the other thing, since we are all committed now to this Zoom, and it is hard to get our board together at a time that's convenient, but since we're not, you know, doing hotel reservations and that kind of thing on December 8th, that meeting might even be able to be pushed back a week.
Good point.
Yeah, that's a good point. Would we better off than going for the week of November 30th, which is obviously really the first week of December?
I would think so. I mean, I think getting done what we need to get done is what's important.
Me too.
And if we have to have Debbie make an oral report to the board and Willis make an oral report to the board, what could be included in the packet is the information we have to date and what we're going forward with.
If we tried to schedule a meeting on November 30th, the truth is, right, this is already going to be an agenda item for our December 8th board meeting. So we don't necessarily have to know what the recommendation is going to be from our our actuary committee for that December 8th meeting to take place, because it's already going to be an agenda item, I would presume.
That's a good point, Clarice. And certainly the committee could receive the report.
Yeah, so I'm good with even moving our committee meeting out to the week of November 30th.
Okay.
So I'll Mike, if you want to reread that motion that you identified and change for the week of November 30th.
Thank you, and it's only partially written, so bear with me if it's less than perfect. We have a motion by Ms. Morrison that we anticipate will be seconded by Ms. Neblett, directing the staff to work with the Willis Towers Watson staff to collect data and conduct analysis on the data points referenced in the WTW recommended future enhancement slide presented, to the extent that work can be done timely to permit this committee to meet again on November 30th and consider the results of that work for purposes of a recommendation to the board at its next regularly scheduled quarterly meeting. And the staff, of course, is authorized and directed to further engage Willis to spend additional time on this element and to spend some minimal amount of funds to modify, as I understand it, Willis's license with respect to models to permit the work.
I think that was TWIA's license, right? Alan, can you, it would be a TWIA license, limited license.
Yeah, it's called a restricted use license.
Excuse me, the license of whomever, I guess, whoever's license needs to be amended.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike.
We've had this is Jerry. I just wanted to alert the committee that we've had discussions and received quotes from RMS and AIR with respect to them running the models on our behalf. I think the aggregate cost of that would be about $140,000 for just the TWIA portfolio. That was principally in connection with our PML determination for reinsurance purposes, but could include and would include average annual loss for pricing purposes.
So Jerry, would that be as much since they wouldn't be doing the work? We don't know until we ask them, right? Like the.
I'm sorry, repeat that.
Well, I thought you said that we would contract with RMS and AIR to run the models, but since they wouldn't be running them, we would still have Willis run the model. We just need a license to allow them to do that. I just was wondering.
Yeah, it may be that what Willis is describing is a different license than what we had contemplated. So
Yeah.
We'll have to. It may be that that's both cheaper and more expedient.
Jerry, Jerry, thanks for that clarity. And yeah, it's a lot of money. And maybe, but Debbie, to your point, maybe it'll be lower than that. But nonetheless, I just think this is critical. You know, we can't walk past this opportunity. So that is my motion, Mike, as I outlined it there.
Can I clarify one thing here? Well, I have a couple things, but we're looking at the list now of the items. I don't want to be it. Some of them are kind of broad. Would this include everything? So for example, the example that I saw from Willis was some type of an inspection report that had both the WPI aid. It also had that the roof was replaced and it had the year it was replaced. There might be other things. So if there are other items, I don't like that we're coming across, I don't want to like throw that data away. You know, can we capture all and everything that we are able to when we do this work? I didn't want to limit it. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but maybe in the way the wording is, Mike, I don't want to limit it to specific things.
Yes, ma'am. I think the motion, as Carice made it, as I tried to capture it, directs Willis and the staff to work together to try to capture as much of this data for purposes of analysis as time permits. And so we just have to let the committee trust the judgment of the staff and the consultant on that point. But I think the staff and the consultant understand that the committee would like it to be as comprehensive as time permits, but the committee realizes there are some limitations.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying.
I second the motion.
This is David Futterly. Would I be able to ask a question before we?
Sure. Yeah, I was going to go ahead, David.
Thank you. So we've heard from Willis Towers Watson a little bit earlier that the inclusion of secondary modifiers could potentially be material on the modeled output from the modeling vendors. I was just wondering if they have a little bit more clarity around what material could mean and what the potential impact could be on the rate indication that they provided. So basically, what is the materiality before we start talking about how much it cost?
I think there was a little bit in the report at the end, but Alan, could you expand on that a little? Your sensitivity analysis and.
I think.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alan.
Jade.
Well, yeah, I would just reference the report, and I don't have the page number. Jade, do you have it?
Page 61. I think that materiality would be over 10%. But we, like we said, we don't really know until we have the actual location level data. This is just kind of like assumptions based on, you know, what we know on a broad scale. So,
so this
the
is
actual result will be, we'll see.
When you say 10%,
Over 10%, it could be
over 10%, but you mean the hurricane loss component of the rate indication, or do you mean 10%?
Oh, I'm speaking to the modeled losses only. So the rate, yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you have a sense for how that translates into a rate indication.
I guess Lisa or Alicia, if you have the rate filing, maybe you can do it quickly, but we weren't prepared for that question.
Yeah, I don't think
pretty quickly.
Because it affects both the AAL and the PML. Like I probably can't do that right on the fly.
Okay.
Yeah, it flows in two different areas, right? In the hurricane loss ratio, as well as the reinsurance, which is part of the fixed expenses. So it would be different impacts that we would have to measure, and probably not given enough time right now.
This is Shira again. So another kind of leading question. So if in your investigation you find that there are secondary risk characteristics or other data that needs to be captured that could reduce our future risk, could you make a recommendation on what those items should be that TWIA should be capturing either at renewal or policy inception, so that we can capture this data on the front end and have maybe our future modeling indicate those reductions in those characteristics, so that we can make sure that we're at least, you know, setting ourselves up for the future on the right path?
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Yeah, we can easily do that. I think Jerry alluded to the fact that some of it's already made and done.
And I just want to stress that because we don't really know what the underlying data is right now, and most of it, like for opening protection, it definitely leads to a decrease, is my sense. But more detailed data doesn't necessarily mean that it would lead to a decrease. So it depends on, you know, the different types of risk characteristics that you guys are able to capture. I can't guarantee that it will just lead to lower losses. It'll be more accurate.
But for the public and for the legislatures, it lends transparency to how we perform our duties with regard to reinsurance and rate.
I think this is Jerry again. We'll do whatever we can to provide additional data, including, you know, whatever secondary risk characteristics are available in-house or through Eagle View in the time available. I would note, however, that you know, well, I think we have to coordinate with Willis, because in the data we provide to reinsurers, we have geocoding to the street level for about 96% of the risks. So and including the two counties they indicated were not geocoded to the street level. So, you know, some of it may be clarification with Willis as to what we have or how we've treated the data, which was not, you know, not done in prior to now.
Okay. Do we have any other comments before we would take a vote on this? Thank you, David, for that comment. And are there any other committee members or board members that would like to have a question or a comment regarding this? Okay, hearing none. Mike Perkins, would you please take a roll call vote for the motion that we have pending?
Yes, ma'am. I will. Ms. Neblett,
Yes.
Tony Schrader, we'll circle back to Mr. Schrader. He's on the phone. He might be having trouble getting his mic turned on. Carice Morrison,
Yes.
David Futterly,
Yes.
Stephen Alexander,
Yes.
Marilyn Hamilton,
Yes.
Chair Debbie King.
Yes.
And circling back, Mr. Schrader, are you available to speak to us? All right, so with Mr. Schrader not being able to vote for whatever reason, perhaps technical, we have a committee of 7 members, all of whom are present. We had a motion made and seconded. We now have 6 affirmative votes in favor of the motion, no votes against. So I think the motion passed.
Motion passed. Yes, motion approved. Thank you very much. This is a good discussion.
Madam Chair, would you entertain another motion?
Yeah, yes, Georgia, thank you.
In light of this evidence that we hope to gather between now and December, and in light of the pandemic that's going on and the request of the legislatures, I make a motion that we make no recommendation or a recommendation of 0 to the board and allow the legislatures to deal with rate issue when they go into session in January, and legislative improvements to TWIA.
No, okay. Are you just to clarify, are you saying no recommendation for the December meeting so that when we meet again, we would not make we would not discuss that?
We would not make a recommendation of any rate increase to be dealt with by the board in December because of the information we're continuing to gather and because of the pandemic and the current conditions.
Mm-hmm. Is there a second to that motion?
This is Steve Alexander. I second that motion.
Thank you, Steve. Any comments before we vote on that?
Georgia, I appreciate your motion. I'll just say personally, I won't be in favor of that. I want to see what the results from this. I want to see what the discussion will be in November. So just wanted to state that for the record, why I would be voting opposed. I want to give this time for us to then decide in our meeting that last week or the week of November 30th before taking action one way or another.
Thank you for the explanation, Corice.
This is David Futterly. I guess I would kind of add to that I agree with what was just said. You know, my role on this committee is an actuary. I'm not gonna, you know, opine on public policy here. You know, my role is to look at the actuarial indications. You know, we've seen the TWIA actuarial report, and now we have a third-party independent review, which, you know, also supports that there is a pretty substantial rate need. So I also would oppose that. So.
Thank you, David. Any other comment?
This is Marilyn Hamilton.
Yes.
I also prefer to leave our options open until we see this additional information. So I will also oppose that motion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Marilyn. Georgia and Steve, I think I'm in that same bucket. I'd like to see the results of this new data capture. We may uncover other things. That's generally the nature of what happens. So we can definitely revisit this potential option when we meet again. So we'd have more information to work from. So with that, can we have a roll, Mr. Perkins, can we have a roll call vote?
Yes, and so my understanding is though there's been some discussion where people have stated their intentions. We're going to vote on a motion by Ms. Neblett, seconded by Mr. Alexander, to make a decision today to make no recommendation for any rate change at the December meeting, and that would be the committee's action. Is that correct?
That is my motion.
Thank you, Ms. Neblett. I will now take the roll call vote on that. Mr. Schrader, who has had some difficulty with communication, was able to reach me on my cell phone to tell me that he voted in favor of the prior motion, and he also wishes to vote in favor of Ms. Neblett's motion. So Mr. Schrader votes in favor of Ms. Neblett's motion. Carice Morrison, your vote?
No.
David Futterleib?
No.
Stephen Alexander?
Yes.
Marilyn Hamilton?
No.
And Ms. Neblett?
Yes.
Ms. King?
No.
By my count, we have everyone present and voting. I show 3 votes in favor and 4 votes against this motion.
The motion did not pass. We definitely can revisit this when we discuss rates, or we'll discuss the output of this data capture and modeling and rate indications at our next meeting.
And before we call that vote in, let me read the names of the individuals and how they voted. It was a 4-3 vote, and I want to make sure I didn't mess it up. Ms. Neblett voted in favor. Mr. Schrader voted in favor. Ms. King voted against. Ms. Morrison voted against. Mr. Futterleib voted against. Mr. Alexander voted in favor, and Ms. Hamilton voted against. And that is a 4-3 vote against.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you to our Willis Towers Watson folks here today. This is an excellent report. It definitely gives us room to even go further, which obviously is what we're doing. We appreciate you partnering with us to get the best result possible. We will expect that you will work with staff over the next few days to get all the legal details worked out. And then we will meet again at the end of November, I think we decided, with that result. So with that, I don't think we have any more business for the day.
Oh, Debbie, this is Steve Alexander. I have another concern that we haven't really talked about, and that is the prevailing industry view that the PCS estimates of catastrophe losses are too low. There's about 20% of the catastrophe bond market that uses PCS losses as a trigger for paying billions of dollars in claims. And it just doesn't seem likely to me that buyers of cat bonds would be willing to risk billions of dollars on a faulty index. I think we need more investigation about whether or not the hurricane models really are overestimating, or let me say that the PCS is really underestimating losses. The Willis report found that the RMS model was overestimating PCS losses by 17%, and the AIR model was overestimating by 31%. If that's the case, that would have a very significant impact on the rate indications and also on the 100-year PML and the reinsurance purchase. So I really think we need to get to the bottom of, is PCS underestimating losses or not? So I would like to make a motion that Willis also be asked to do further investigation or justification on this and explain to us in more detail why PCS they think, or the industry thinks, that is underestimating catastrophe losses.
Okay. That sounds reasonable. I didn't know that either. That was underestimated. Do you want, is there any comment? I don't remember who made that comment. Was that Jade or
I can add a couple of comments.
Prasad? Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I think that comment is more relevant and related to old historical data where PCS actually changed their reporting structure, for different catastrophes, since 2003, I believe, if I'm not totally wrong, they put in place a very consistent approach of recording all natural catastrophes with, I believe, causing losses greater than 25 or 40 million in total. So anything above that is recorded. The practice in the past was a little bit of changing time over time. That's where we have less confidence in there in terms of their claims data, but it's no way reflective of what they are doing today. That's one part of the answer to your question. And then second part is there are other elements that might not be captured in the data, such as, loss to boats, are they treated as automobile or not? How they are recorded back into PCS, there is a little bit of uncertainty from our understanding of it. But no way our statement is in relation to whether it is grossly overstating or understating the CAT bond or related pricing aspect of it.
Thank you, Prasad. Steve, do you want to leave that motion? I mean, we can vote on it. Shoot, is your motion to add more on the follow-up, to add more in the report regarding this topic?
Yes, and I think
Okay.
maybe we could make a distinction between older storms and more recent storms. If the data in the past was not as good as the recent data, but I think we need to investigate further whether there's a systematic bias in the models compared to the more recent PCS data that seems that he's saying is more accurate. So I do think this is an issue. I think it needs to be investigated further, and I would like to have Willis include a more detailed analysis on this in their revised report.
Okay.
I'd be happy to second that.
Okay, thank you, Georgia. Can I just ask the Willis folks, since you're all here, is that something you could do for us?
Yeah, I think we would probably need some conversations on the side. It's unclear on what exactly the request is. It's PCS versus modeled loss, from what I understand.
Steve, can you clarify that?
Yes, the report says that the RMS model has overestimated losses by 17% compared to 8 relatively recent large storms, and the air model has overestimated losses compared to PCS by 31%. I think we need more investigation on that, and we need to understand why that's happening.
Okay. Debbie, we'll try and provide some information about that.
Okay.
But we,
Okay.
like I said, if we have some questions, we'll come back to you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we have the motion on the pending and a second. So, Mr. Perkins, could you please take a roll call vote?
Yes, ma'am, I certainly will. Corrine Morrison,
Yes.
David Futterleaf,
No.
Stephen Alexander,
Yes.
Marilyn Hamilton,
Yes.
Georgia Neblett,
Yes.
Debbie King.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Schrader, are you able to vote at this time?
Yes.
And how do you vote? So I guess that was an affirmative vote.
I think so.
Okay.
I think that was a yes.
Okay. Yeah, I just wasn't sure if he's answering my question or voting. All right, so to recap, the only vote against was from Mr. Futterleib, so we have a motion that passed by 6 votes to 1.
Thank you. With that, any other comments?
Yeah, one question about that.
Sure.
So I guess, you know, obviously Willis, it seems as though they have a little bit more to understand for sure of the request, but but our report will include, I guess, them opining about this somehow, right? And I guess will also tell us whether that's material or not, whether it has an impact on their indications or not. Is that true?
Yeah, we will expand on what's in the current report.
Okay.
We will talk about any impact on the rate filing. But I do just want to clarify one thing. I think Steve was saying that, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, the 17% was an overestimate, I believe it was phrased. I just want to make it clear that 17% over the current PCS. So we don't create PCS losses. We don't create the model loss. It was just a statement that one is higher than the other. So it's not an overestimate.
Correct.
Okay. So I think you're right, Carice. We can opine and expand on what's in the report.
Okay.
And then, yeah, we're fine with that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Are there any other comments before we adjourn?
I think there might be one unfinished item of business from public comment. I'll ask Ms. Donnelly if she has anything for us there.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Perkins. There was a miscommunication during the public comment period where a hand was raised and then lowered in error. And so there was an individual that was wanting to make public comment. Unfortunately, I don't see that individual listed as an attendee. They might have left. Behind the scenes, we were attempting to contact that individual, but we have not been able to reach them at this point to rejoin the meeting.
But I think it just, you know, to complete our record, from what I've seen behind the scenes, the individual's a gentleman named Charlie Zahn who wanted to speak to express opposition to a rate increase. And through just a combination of just technical confusion and difficulty, we weren't able to receive his comment today. But of course, we'll make sure to be watching for that at the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that update. And Mike Perkins, there's nothing else pending, correct?
No, ma'am, I do not believe there are any other.
Okay. Okay. So with that, thank you again to everyone that participated, all the public comments, and in that Willis Towers Watson team, you're awesome. And on all the committee members and board members participating, and TWIA staff. Do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved. Second.
Second. Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
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 I don't think will anybody oppose, but anyone opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Meeting's adjourned. We will schedule the next one in a couple of months. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.